Except I vow to taste the truth of the Tathagata. Good evening, everybody. I have like 10 pairs of these scattered around the house, so I guess I need to scatter them around here as well, or put them in different robes and things. Well, I just want to let you know that through the Zoom we have Scott and Ray. Hi, guys. And here we have a fine assortment of bodhisattvas, too numerous to name. And for various different reasons, people practice with us in lots of different parts of the schedule that they can do in person, on the Zoom, and so on. And so I just want to appreciate Scott and Ray, who practice with us all the time, but we don't always see them in the flesh. So nice to have you part of us always. A couple of announcement-y things. One is a couple of Saturdays from now, we'll have a one-day sit. It's just a really wonderful way to practice together, here and also on the Zoom, on June 1st. We start at 7, and the formal practice goes till 3 with a couple of meals, and we cook and eat as part of our practice too, which is wonderful. Eat together. And then this particular one is then followed by a special ceremony at 3-ish, a priest training completion ceremony for Ryushin Kate here. And this I'll say more on the day, but this is a kind of the essence of a much longer Dharma transmission ritual to just acknowledge Kate's long practice and try to get it through her thick skull in one more way that she's perfect just the way she is. We need very elaborate, decades-long practices and intense rituals and lots of love and friends, don't we? Just to actually remember that we were fine from the beginning. Yeah. Another thing is I have a belief that tonight and probably other nights as well, not everybody who put out their little white card was able to come to Doksan. So just a few notes about that. One is I always feel badly. I mean, it's just the way it goes, but I do feel that way. Another is if there's something up for you, you wanted to come with some urgency or energy, just flag me down and we'll talk somewhere. It's nice for me to do the individual meetings to Dokusan within the Zazen schedule, just because my overall schedule is kind of packed sometimes, and I'm already here. It's Zen multitasking that I do the Dokusan during Zazen. Sorry, Buddha. It's traditional. So that's one thing. You just grab me and say, Tim, I really need to talk to you for a minute. And that's okay, or we can figure out a time. Another is that I have a lot of capacity, if it fits your schedule, weekday mornings at 7 through the Zoom. I do Doksan then, and most days I don't have requests, so there's plenty of time. And the other thing, and this is the mythic future that I've been thinking about obsessively, once we're in the new building, there'll be more opportunities for Dokusan. And I'll be there more even when we're not sitting offering Dokusan. So once we have a facility, we'll make use of it. So anyway, it's such an important core practice. And I'm not saying that you need to talk to me for some reason, but that it's just something happens when we go to the room and we're kind of making use of these deep archetypes, right? The teacher and the impressive get-up, sitting, and I can't read your mind, and what do I know, but something emerges in that meeting, something happens that really we can't bring forth on our own. One of Dogen's famous essays is called Only a Buddha and a Buddha, and what he says in that essay, in a convoluted Dogen way, is you need another Buddha. You really need another Buddha to express and feel your awakeness. So you just bring up whatever is on top of mind, and we explore a little, and Sometimes there's a little, like a pretty formal kind of exchange, other times just much more chatty and relaxed, and it just depends on what needs to come up, you know. So anyway, full invitation to come to Dokusan. Oh, and then the last thing is, if you didn't get in on one week, it's totally legit and cool to tell the Jisha, the teacher's assistant, I didn't get in last week, can you get me first? That's fine, it's totally fine. He might forget, but, and that's fine too. Yeah, so anyway. So speaking of Dogen, I want to talk about Dogen tonight. The practice leaders got together last fall, like we do every year, and we pick kind of a theme, a teaching theme for the year, which then we hold lightly and don't always do, but we do. And this year's theme is Dogen. Our famous founder in Japan from the 1200s, Eihei Dogen. If you were here during practice period, Reisela helped us dive deeply into one of Dogen's most famous writings, a little essay called Genjo Koan. And I sprinkled a few talks here and there, but now I'm like ready to get to work, I've been warming up and thinking about this for a couple decades, and I'm ready to talk about Dogen. And then also you can enjoy every Tuesday evening online at 7. Chris has a merry band of people that are just very gently and steadily reading through Dogen's works and, trying to free themselves of too much understanding of it, just enjoying and merging with Dogen. So, and Dogen's interesting, he's difficult to understand, and it's very much on purpose. It's not like he kind of meant to be understandable and he forgot. It's very deliberate how he uses language. He's really, in most of his pieces, really trying to challenge the way we think, And he's using language to challenge the mind that uses language to make sense of things, and so he uses language in these kind of upside down and creative and interesting ways. And a lot of it is just all about a central idea in Zen Buddhism, which is that our suffering comes from the ways we divide things up, sometimes called dualistic thinking. The mind tends to think about things as you or me, big or small, good or bad, all these different opposites that we kind of map onto the world. And the point that's made is if you think about it, there's no big without little, right? There's no good without bad. And that there's a way that they're not separate in the way that we think they are. And that separateness is also the separateness of, isolation of each of us, And that the human organism, the Buddha nature in us or the psychology in us, our deepest wish is to merge, right? Is to connect, is to let go of our defended status. And our very language and conceptual thinking does that. It separates us. So Dogen's really interested in language, and he does talk in language about, the problems with language. So he's hard to read, and so it's kind of like hard to get around to reading Dogen, I've got a big library, and, the hand doesn't go first to Dogen, But then the beautiful thing about Dogen is you can also just set all that aside, not try to figure out, not figuring out, right? That would be a little bit convoluted, right? So his complicated language is not telling you, think harder about the way you think so that you don't think that hard, That would just mess you up more. He actually says, well, let me muck with your thinking for a minute, but now the real thing you should do is sit. Is just sit. So that's why it's so central in what we do together here. Just practice. Just be. Just feel organically the softness and the edges and the gaps in all your conceptual ways of making the universe. Let all that stuff settle in whatever way it does, and it may never look very settled, but it is happening. And don't think that you're sitting in order for anything to happen. He actually he makes up words too, and one of the words he made up, shuso ito, means practice enlightenment or practice verification, and there's oneness in there, practice verification one. So that our practice is this merging, is this connection, is this Buddhahood from the beginning. It's not like if you practice long enough and eventually they recognize you in a special ceremony and the secret sauce gets sprinkled or something. No, it's from the beginning. Practice enlightenment, practice verification. I always heard it as practice enlightenment at first. I only recently saw this translation verification, and it's maybe a little more useful, We're verifying what we already knew, Practice verify. So anyway, I'm getting on the project and ready to do the hard work. I was looking through Shobo Genzo, his master work, all this long, long collection of different essays he wrote over his entire life. And then I found a really interesting one. I'm like, I'm starting with this one. It's really short, and it's really straightforward. It's like tangled up mess with our minds. Dogen was taking a vacation, and nice Dogen wrote this one little essay. So I thought I'd share that with you too, so we can take heart that you can understand Dogen. This essay is called Doshin, translated as Do is the way, like Zendo or the Tao, and Shin is heart-mind. So the heart-mind of the way, the heart of the way. It's just 3 pages in English translation, so let's just get right into it. Here's how it starts. In seeking the Buddha way, make the heart of the way primary. Make the heart of the way primary. It's about the heart. Those who know the heart of the way are rare. Inquire closely of those who know it. So look for good Dharma friends that you feel like, they have Dharma heart. Hang out with them, Inquire closely doesn't mean like, what's your secret? It actually means just really be with them, Pay attention, listen, and watch. And he goes on, there are those in the world who have the heart of the way, but in fact lack of the true heart of the way. But in fact, there are many who lack the true heart of the way. There are those who have true heart of the way who are not known by others. Thus it is hard to know whether one does or does not have the true heart of the way. So there's a discernment here, And this all sounds a little dualistic too, which is interesting. Like some have it and some don't have it. I thought that was the opposite of your message, dear Dogen. But there's also something to this, really, right? Seeking out good spiritual friends. And I love this line about there are those with the true heart of the way who are not known by others, and they might not know that themselves either, I think we all know people like that. With good hearts. They definitely have the heart of the way. And then you ask them about it, they're like, I don't know anything, right? So it's all about our hearts and paying attention to who we keep company with, and who we share our hearts with. So feel into that. And this can express in any different kind of way, right? It's a feeling. There's no obvious marker. You don't have to act a certain way. Could be a loud heart of the way person or a quiet heart of the way person, gentle, forceful, excited, sleepy. There's every different kind of heart of the way person, as many as there are people. Then he goes on to say, in this declining world, there is a lack. There is a lack of those who have the true heart of the way. So for the time being, keep your mind on impermanence. Do not forget that the world is transient and that human life is precarious. So this is a classic Buddhist contemplation from the beginning. This is not particularly unique to Dogen. Recognize how impermanent everything is, how temporary, how precious, how rare, And that we're doing this in a declining world. I think we can relate to that right now, right? It feels like a declining world, and it did in Dogen's time too. This refers to a Buddhist theory created probably after the historic Buddha. It's a Mahayana idea that there are actually these vast cycles of time, and that was an earlier Indian idea also, vast cycles of time, and periodically Buddhas appear. So like the Buddha of our age is the Shakyamuni Buddha from 500 BC or so. And then they eventually, vanish from the world. Everything comes and goes, even Buddhas. And after the Buddha vanishes, there's a period of time where people are totally fine. They're still very aware of their Buddha nature, they understand the teachings, they're repeating the teachings, practicing the teachings. But then inevitably over time they start to forget. So the declining world is a time of forgetting, so maybe that's both 1224 and 2024, equally so. How else would things be the way they are? So all the more important to study impermanence and recognize how precious this human life is. And he says, sometimes this looks like a human life. Oh, sorry. Just mixed myself up, confusing Dogen with me. Hold on. Oh, yeah. He also says, this is great. He says, don't forget the world is transient and the human life is precarious. And then he says, but don't be too preoccupied with reflecting on impermanence. So don't get obsessive about this either. Isn't that great? It's very balanced, It's incredibly important and urgent. Study impermanence. And then he's like, and, chill. And then he says, and always take the Dharma seriously and our lives more lightly. Don't even begrudge your body for the sake of the Dharma. So don't be so precious, Love the Dharma. Give it your all. So then after this, so that's the intro about the heart of the way and seeking it out and feeling it and noticing how precious it is, not getting too precious about it at the same time. And then the longest section of Doshi, the heart of the way, is about chanting and devotion. Also a little bit unique to Dogen. So I'm just going to try to not interrupt myself and read this whole section, and then we'll talk about it. Then, deeply respect the three treasures, Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha. Vow to respect and dedicate yourself to the three treasures, even if your life or body changes, asleep or awake. Think of the merit of the three treasures. Asleep or awake, chant the three treasures, chant the refuges. When you leave this life, and before you enter the next life, there is a place called an intermediary realm. You stay there for 7 days. You should resolve to keep chanting the names of the three treasures without ceasing while you are there. After 7 days in the intermediary realm, you die into another intermediary realm. And these have technical names and stuff, which we left out. And you remain there for 7 more days. At this time, you can see and hear without hindrance like someone with a celestial eye. And you should still resolve to encourage yourself to keep chanting the names of the three treasures without ceasing. I take refuge in Buddha, I take refuge in Dharma, I take refuge in Sangha. It's actually one of the few things I know in Japanese. Namu kie butsu, namu kie ho, namu kie so. Say that over and over again. We often do a version of that while we sew our sacred robes. Namu kie butsu. Anyway, I said I wouldn't comment, sorry. So you're in the second intermediary realm, and you have this clarity, a vision, but you don't stop chanting. All right. After passing through the intermediary realms, when you approach your parents to be conceived, did you catch that? As you approach your parents, ready to be conceived, maintain authentic wisdom, and so keep chanting refuge in the three treasures in your mother's womb. Do not neglect chanting, and do not neglect chanting while you are being born. This is a thoroughgoing practice, huh? As you develop the 6 faculties, so as your senses form, you should wish to make offerings, recite, and take refuge in the three treasures. when your life ends, so you go through life now, when your life ends, your eyesight will suddenly become dark. Know that this is the end of your life and be determined to chant, I take refuge in Buddha, I take refuge in Dharma, I take refuge in Sangha. Then all the Buddhas in the 10 directions will show compassion to you, even if, due to conditions, you are bound to an unwholesome realm. Buddhas still appreciate you. Bow and listen to the Buddha. After darkness arises in your eyes, continue to chant refuge in the 3 treasures until you enter the intermediary realm and further. So it's all going around again. Keep chanting. Keep chanting. Birth after birth, world after world, until you reach enlightenment, the Buddha fruit. This is the way all Buddhas and Bodhisattvas have practiced. It is the way to deeply realize Dharma. It is an embodiment of the Buddha way. Resolve not to involve yourself with thoughts other than this. So good advice, huh? Yeah, just practice. I take refuge in Buddha. I take refuge in Dharma. I take refuge in Sangha. We'll close our evening with a chant. We'll chant this in Pali, not Japanese or English, but in Pali. Buddham saranam gacchami. And maybe we see this as a nice ritual, a beautiful song, maybe a nice sort of antidote to the monotonal chanting we usually do. Maybe as a community kind of merging of voices. But it turns out it's a lot more than that. It's the practice to keep you wholesome and well through all your lives and lives to come, and even in the transitions between life and death. He only mentions, I think, scholastical side note, he mentions a few of the 7-day intermediary states between birth and death, but there are actually 7 of them, and for a total of 49 days. So that's why we have this whole thing around 49 days after death is a period of actively remembering and mourning. And mourning isn't quite the right word for us. It's more like appreciating and making offerings and sending blessings to the people who have died. Because they're going through all this, and we need to support them as they do. Lest they forget to chant, I take refuge in Buddha, we chant it, for them. So that's really clarifying to me. I didn't quite get all that. And this whole period of different stages is very complex, and there's lots of books. I don't know it, but the Tibetans called this the bardos. The Japanese, it turns out, call it chu'u. So there's a whole section like that. So find the heart of the way. Devote yourself to the 3 treasures through all your lifetimes. And then he gives like a couple of practical practices you can do when you are alive. So here are the practices to do. Work to create a Buddha image in your lifetime. Once it is created, dedicate 3 types of offerings: a mat, sweet water, and candles. Purify them and offer them to that image. So make, or, it's okay to buy one, I think, a Buddha image and make offerings. So we do that. Also, create copies of the Lotus Sutra in your lifetime. Write it or make a print of it and maintain it. Place it on your head and bow to it. Offer flowers, incense, candles, food, drink, and clothing. And then he has a little technical note. Be sure your head is clean before you put the sutra on it. So, as you know, Lotus Sutra, very important sutra, and Dogen was a big fan, which those who have studied the Lotus Sutra might find that interesting, because it seems very different from his teachings, But he loved the Lotus Sutra. And a commentary I read about this little piece of Dogen's made a couple of points. The first is how surprisingly conventional most of it is. These are standard Buddhist practices, and Dogen's often kind of making radical shifts in the way he talks about practice. But also that he left out a standard practice most all of his Japanese Buddhist peers would have also emphasized before death to chant a special chant to ensure your rebirth in the Pure Land. Namu Amida Butsu. So there's this whole, it's a whole nother topic, but there's this whole thing about the Pure Land of Amida Buddha you can get reborn into, and that's like the best place to be reborn in. And actually, if you just do this other chant, you'll probably get reborn there. But I guess Dogen has more of a kind of purist bodhisattva idea. He didn't want this off-ramp to the Pure Land. Just chant for Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha and return to this world. Return to this world because there's more work to do. There's beings to help. So it's sort of very traditional, this little text, and also he skipped interestingly skipped one traditional thing, at least for the Japanese Buddhist tradition. And probably China too. And then here's the close of this little essay, Doshin, which gets more Dogen-y again. He tells us to sit zazen. Do zazen regularly with your kashaya on. There is a precedence for attaining the way in the third lifetime as a result of wearing a kashaya in this lifetime. It is the robe of all Buddhas in the past, present, and future. Its merit is immeasurable. Zazen is not a method of the three realms. It is the method of Buddha ancestors. So do zazen regularly with, properly dressed. So kashaya is the Sanskrit word for this garment, which is called kesa, or okesa, just means great kesa, okesa in Japanese. Supposedly designed by the Buddha one day. It has some patterns to it that's supposed to represent fields. And so yeah, Dogen was big into robes, and so that's a little tricky for us because we also love robes, but we also understand that it's not just like this fabric, It's a much bigger vision than that. And the problem with thinking it's just this fabric is because then only certain people get the special fabric, and they're the special people, or they're the deluded, opiate of the masses people, depending, but they're somehow different from the people who don't have the special clothes. And then the robe becomes an instrument of suffering instead of an instrument of awakening. So I think it's just an interesting practice for us to really hold in our hearts that for some people, their path and practice involves sewing and wearing the obvious robe. And for some of us, that robe is invisible, It's the heart robe, and we're all wearing the robe. We're all wearing the robe. So that's how I think about it. And people who wear the robe also understand that you wear this robe not because you're special, but because you need more help. You need more help being humble. And you're also choosing to help, you're inviting everyone else to help you remember your humility by wearing special stuff. And then they look to you and expect you to be very upright and very good and very aware and very on it. And when you're a schlep, then they're like, ah. Whereas if you didn't wear the special stuff, you could have gotten away with that, So we should all know that we're all wearing the robe and that the robe is very special and it takes this form and other forms. That said, I wanted to mention, in case you hadn't heard yet, flipping to the other side of the coin, that there are two among our Sangha who have recently received permission from their teachers to sew the kashaya, to sew the okesa, which is what priests begin to wear after ordination. So Seishin will ordain with me, and Razela will ordain with Chris Fortin. So they both are going to start sewing. Yeah.
Tim, when did he write this?
We don't know. It's not dated. Yeah, good question. It's not dated, and it's also not clear where he meant it to be included in the Shobogenzo or if he did at all. Maybe he just whipped this off one time without thinking about it, and it got saved, by his disciples.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. We were just talking about it in a little group this morning, and saying that he kind of had a change of heart with the chanting and putting together an altar and everything, that sometime before, he really didn't, pay so much attention to the ritual and the altar and everything, and then he had a change of heart with with the sweet water and, so anyway, I just wondered.
Well, yeah, I mean that there is some truth to that story, but it's also as usual one of those where it's more complicated probably, and yeah, we know that Dogen in a lot of his writings in kind of the middle part of his career wrote that way and spoke that way. Don't get hung up on this. It's not necessary. And there's a period where he was quoting his teacher a lot, and quoting his teacher as saying, "Don't do these rituals." But when they rounded up the collected teachings of his teaching, they couldn't find any of that stuff that Dogen says he said. And we know for sure from the the historic record that Dogen created monasteries at which they did all these rituals every day, right? But one thing that I think is true too is like it appears to have happened mostly. He did a trip when he was about 52 or so to the powers that be in Kamakura, in one of the capitals, and after that he started writing a lot more about karma and morality and emphasizing devotion more. So the way he talked changed. Whether the way he actually practiced changed that much, it's hard to tell. But yeah, it's interesting. Yeah. So let me close with a poem, actually, and then we have time for a little discussion. I'm trying to live into my idea that every other time or so we'll discuss, and other times it's nice just to be quiet. So here's a poem from Ryokan. If you don't know Ryokan, he's a wonderful character, 18th century Japanese monk poet, and I'll tell you more about him later. He loved Dogen. And in his day, Dogen's teachings were actually being rediscovered. This is a funny little thing about Dogen's history. He wrote all this stuff. He was a prolific author in his lifetime. His close students and his peers knew what he was writing, and he was a little bit of notoriety because some of it's a little radical. But after he died, it's like they rolled up the scrolls and put them on the altar and stopped reading them for like 400 years, Venerated them, Oh, the great teaching. But didn't study it, And then in the 1800s, there was a revival to unroll them and study them. And a few of us, Desiree here included, just took this intensive course on one of the leaders of that movement, a guy named Menzon. And so Ryokan was contemporary with Menzon. I don't know if they ever would have met, but it was kind of in the air, beyond Menzon. So Ryokan, who is this wonderful poet, wouldn't have had access to the whole collection, but he had a few copies, and so he'd like to study them. So here's a beautiful poem by Ryokan, and then we'll have a little discussion time. He's living in a simple hut, living very, very simply. On a spring evening around midnight, rain mixed with snow sprinkled on the bamboo in the garden. I wanted to ease my loneliness, but it was quite impossible. My hand reached behind me for the record of Eihei Dogen. Beneath the open window at my desk, I offered incense, lit a lamp, and quietly read. Body and mind dropping away is simply the upright truth. In 1,000 postures, 10,000 appearances, a dragon toys with the jewel. His understanding beyond conditioned patterns cleans up our corruption. The ancient great master's style reflects the image of India, Buddha. I remembered in my old days when I lived in Intsu Monastery. My late teacher lectured on the true Dharma I, Dogen. And at that time there was an occasion to turn myself around, so I requested his permission to read it, and I studied it intimately. I keenly felt that until then I had depended merely on my own ability. After that I left my teacher and wandered all over. Between Dogen and myself, what else is there? Everywhere I went, I devotedly practiced the true Dharma I, arriving at the depths, arriving at the vehicle. How many times? Inside this teaching, never any shortcomings. I studied the master of all things. That evening, sitting by the lamp, my tears wouldn't stop, and soaked into the records of the ancient Buddha Ehe. In the morning, an old man next door came to my thatched hut. He asked me why the book was so damp. I wanted to speak, but I didn't. I was deeply embarrassed. It was impossible to give an explanation. I dropped my head and found some words. Last night's rain drenched my bookcase and my heart. Mm-hmm. Yeah, isn't that nice? It's a pretty long poem for him, and much more narrative. Most of his poems aren't so long. Anyway. So let's cluster into groups of 3 in a moment. And here's my suggestion to talk about. How does this land for you, this heart of the Dharma? You might think about, how does your Dharma heart feel when you feel in touch with it or aware of it, or when you're not so aware of it? So what's this about your heart, your Dharma heart? What's that for you? And or how do you express your devotion to Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha? Dharma heart, Dharma jewels. How is it for you? Not the idea of it or what we read, but what's the feeling? What's the expression? How do you live into this? How do you not live into this? How do you practice with your whatever feeling about how you're doing? And we're so good at evaluating ourselves, right? So try to notice that. If the first thing you says is, "Oh, I'm no good at this," I hope your neighbors will all just kind of... But actually, no, they'll listen respectfully and give you space to your suffering. We have to go through it. No right answers, right? No wrong answers. And let's actually very kind of formally take turns tonight. We have just enough time, I think, for 4-minute turns. Maybe somebody can ring me a bell. Please find yourself in a group of 3, and if you guys can hang around, I'll put you in a breakout room and you can be partners. Cool. And I'll let you guys self-time. I won't try to broadcast into you. You get like 5 or 6 minutes each. And I'll try to remember to bring you back, too. Thank you, David.
Yeah.
So if the numbers don't work out, we can have a group of 2, but let's not have a group of 4. Good. Yeah, 2 or 3. So this is a really powerful and important kind of practice, this kind of mindful speaking and listening. So let me just say a few more things. Escúcheme. Say it in Spanish, people listen, it's good. So all you need to do now is pick a first person, then I'll give a little direction. Who's willing to go first? Oh, thank you, brave volunteer. So here it is. It's really kind of formalized to create space. It's not like a rule-bound thing, but a spacious thing, which is that we'll just be quiet a minute together. So just take a breath, close your eyes if you feel like it. And we'll only, when the bell rings, the first speaker will speak, and it's completely their time, completely their space. They get the whole 4 minutes. If you run out of things to say, you can just sit quietly, see if something else bubbles. And your partners are just going to listen. They're not going to nod and smile or uh-huh or yeah, me too, or ask you a question. They're just going to listen. You're just going to listen. And then after that, we'll ring and pause and ring again. So it'll just be these little like emergences from Zazen kind of feeling. That's the feeling of it. So it's kind of like not a conversation. It's an expression and an engagement. Okay? So, first speaker.